We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Welcome to the Mankind podcast, and today's episode is all about man's relationship with money. Oh yeah, we're getting into the shadowy bits with our finances with full leader in the Mankind Project, Rick Broniec.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than just one way to be a man. I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and I am, got to give myself a slap on the wrist. We just spent the past month talking about shadow, diving into all the many facets of it. Not all of them, but majority of them. And me being the silly bugger that I am, in my infinite complacency, forgot to upload the episode on shadow with money. Money shadow. Now, it's so interesting that we as men, the topic of money is such a sensitive topic. I remember talking with my grandparents back in the day, and they would say you never, ever either asked about someone else's wealth or shared your own, right? Shared insights into your own monetary situation. Which, to me, I get that, being raised in the society that we live in. But as we've been learning with Shadow, all these different experiences, our relationships with sex, our relationships with others, our relationships with money, have such a grip on us, have such a grip on how we move through life. I mean, I know what it's like to look at the bank account. I know what it's like to not look at the bank account, be terrified to open the app to see that negative amount, because all of a sudden I see that negative 2,000 in my bank account, which represents my worth. I'm not just talking financial worth, I'm talking self-worth. And over the past year or so, I've really been finding myself finding a rhythm with my relationship with money, much in part thanks to my friend Amber Hawken, who shared with me that money is just energy. Bit esoteric, bit woo-woo, but it's kind of true, and it's really helped me that money really is just energy. We as human beings have created it as this means to trade, right? To impart value. However, somewhere along the line, we were told that we need to line up our self-worth with our financial worth, which, how many lives have you seen uprooted because of money? How many divorces have there been because of money? And so today I want to introduce to you Rick Broniec. Now, Rick Broniec is a full leader in the Mankind Project, and he has been with this organization for a couple decades. Remarkable man. He's had a huge impact on my life, both in person on New Warrior trainings and in these conversations. Now, Rick is a Shadow Work Facilitator, and he's worked with David Gruder, the man who introduced this whole topic to us at the beginning of this series. He's worked with David on shadow stuff, especially money shadow. And so in this episode, I think you're really going to enjoy Rick's take on money shadow, his relationship with money, his story, his journey of how he's been able to really create a healthy relationship with what's in his bank account, what comes in and what goes out. And my hope for all of you out there is that even if you can grow 1 degree closer to a healthier relationship with money, then our job here is done. Because this is one of those things, just like our relationships with sex and many other taboo things that we've been told, affairs have to be in order. You can only talk about things in this light and not in that light. It's these seemingly insignificant 1 degree changes in our lives that really bear the best fruit. All right, playing that long game. So if you can listen to this episode, listen intently, investigate within yourself, ask yourself the question, what is my relationship with money? What kind of grip does money have in my life? And how can I improve my relationship with money so that I can be the better man for myself, for my loved ones, for society, and just enjoy life more? So it's time to rip the power out of Shadow's hand. It's time to gain control of your shadow and build a right relationship with it. And so this will be the last episode of the series on Shadow with Rick Broniec. Enjoy. G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. And today we're joined by full leader Rick Broniec, and we're going to be talking about man's relationship with money. And I'm really excited to dive into this because as a young man, I'm still trying to figure out what money means to me in life. I've made a lot of it, and I've spent almost all of it. You know, I've saved well, I've spent horribly, I've done everything in between, and I don't really know how to best utilize this energy, this resource in my life. And I know for many men's life, because in the circles that I've sat in and the weekends that I've been a part of with Through the Mankind Project, money seems to be this sticking point for a lot of people. And so I thought, who better to bring on than the man himself, Rick Broniec, who's been involved in the Mankind Project for a long time. And not just for his experience in the Mankind Project, but Rick, your experience in working around what we call money shadow and what many would call a toxic relationship with money. So, mate, take a moment to introduce yourself and we'll dive straight in.
Well, thanks, Brandon. It's so great to be on the show again with you. By the way, I love what you're doing with the Mankind podcast. It's really awesome. A powerful addition to men's work. I appreciate it. Well, what do I say? I don't know. My relationship with money shadow started very, very early on in my life. I believe it does for most of us. And I think it's so powerful for men and toxic because money shadow is to men what body image is to women, I believe. It is the way that society judges us, puts us into categories and hierarchies, and it's very painful for many of us, no matter where we are in that hierarchy, being judged. And so that analogy has been very helpful to me. And when most men and women hear it, they go, yeah, I think that rings true. I don't know. At least in the United States. So where does mine come from? Well, a lot of it has to do with my early childhood. My father left the home when I was just 7 years old for the first time. There were 6 kids in the house. So we went from a lower middle class life to living literally in a tenement house in downtown Milwaukee and eating macaroni and cheese night after night after night. So I went to very poor. And then my father would come back in and we'd be elevated again financially, and then he'd leave again. He left 7 times during the course of, my childhood. So there was, crazy making messages about money, about what we could afford and what we couldn't afford, and what I had to take on as the oldest son of that family. And they really didn't start manifesting until, surprisingly, I got married myself and began to confront what it was like to support a family, support a wife, support 2 daughters. And man, it did a number on me. And I think it does for a lot of men. I know the money shadow was really deep, Brandon, because I was in an amazing I group in Milwaukee for 25 years that had 5 certified leaders in one I group. And we talked about everything, the most dark, deepest shadows. I mean, I'd come home every night from my group with, snot running out of my nose. And and it was amazing. And I said one night, I'm struggling with this money shadow stuff. I want to talk about money next time. And there was like dead silence in the room. Everybody went, well, okay. It scared the hell out of the whole group. And I knew I'd hit a nerve. And this was back in the early 1990s. And I want to acknowledge Joe Mancini from the Washington, D.C. community, who had come to Milwaukee and stayed with me for a few days, and he and I began this dialogue about money shadow. And out of that came the Money Shadow workshop that I've presented many times, locally and nationally, and a couple of times internationally. I also want to acknowledge Howard Shosky and my good friend David Gruder, who has helped mold my ideas about shadow in general and money shadow specifically. And I think it runs very, very deep for men. Brandon, one of the brilliant things that Bill Kauth and Rich Tosi and Ron Herring did very early in NWTAs is we purposely never introduced ourselves or talked about our careers, or even talked about our real names. And we were stripped down at everything. So we didn't have all of the accoutrements that men notice about other men and put them into categories like the watches and the jewelry and the cars and all that. And that put us on a kind of a level playing field. And I think that was brilliant. And it also created a shadow, I think, for the whole organization, not just for us as individuals.
Yeah, void. There was a training we did. It was after my first New Warrior training, the PIT training, right? So what does PIT stand for again? For those
Primary
listening?
integration training.
Primary integration training. That was not me, all you listeners out there. That was not me forgetting the name of the the PIT. So the primary integration training, there you go, I've exposed it again, where we did some interesting work. We had men all stand in the middle of a field, and they had us, if you make over six figures, stand on that side of the field. If you make under let's just say $28,000, that side, and if you land in the middle, stay in the middle. And it was incredibly vulnerable for me to move to where I was standing, because I noticed all these other men around me that I had no idea what they did. And so we had a bunch of people above six figures, some below, and it was amazing to watch the posture change in so many. I saw some men who were generally a bit more quiet go to the above six figures, and I watched their chests stick up, their shoulders roll back, their chin up high, and they seemed very proud. And then I watched a dear friend of mine, 6'5", big man, had no idea what he made. He goes to the below 28,000, and I watched his shoulders drop and his chin drop, and you could have cut the air with a knife when that question was asked. I mean, you could have had everyone drop their pants and, how big's your willy? I mean, they wouldn't have been anywhere near as terrified as the money part of that process.
Absolutely.
So why do you think that is? Why do you feel like men have such a hang up around money and what it means for them and their work?
Well, I think I've touched on it a little bit already, is that it's how we evaluate each other and also how we find mates. I mean, it's not beyond the pale to think that women need security and they look for men that make more money. And we know that. We're not stupid. And we evaluate each other constantly. Based on the accoutrements of being wealthier or not wealthier, having access to resources, not having access to resources. For some of us, for me as a child, it was literally survival. I didn't know where the next meal was coming from time to time. I was never homeless. I was close, but never homeless. I don't want to, put it out there like that at all. But there was a sense of tension in my household around money. If I asked for something, I was often told, we can't afford that, Rick, or your younger brothers and sisters need something else. I didn't go to a dentist till I was 12 years old, mostly to save money. And then I found out I had a mouthful of cavities. It's had profound impacts on my life, and I know many other men's lives. And I think it plays into class in a big way. We like to think we're a classless society in the United States, but we definitely are not. And we definitely are aware of how we were raised and also how that's impacted our lives. That comes up in the Unpacking Power, Privilege, and Difference, the program that I have the privilege of helping lead. I'm the program manager for that. And we do a whole day on class. And it's just profound when people take the time to think back to their childhood and think how they were raised and what the messages they received around money. In my money workshop, for example, I start with a simple exercise of what my father taught me about money is. And it's profound to go around the circle and have men and women, when I do a co-gender workshop, share the messages they receive from their fathers around money. And then, of course,
what kind of answers do you do? What are some examples of
the
some
most
answers?
common answer is nothing. Or money is something you keep secret, you don't talk about. That is a profound message that many of us receive. You don't.
Doesn't grow on trees. Root of all
Exactly.
evil. Right.
There's a lot of Christian belief that gets rolled into that. It's religious belief. There's a lot of shame associated with it. We don't talk about it. We don't ask. We never ask somebody else how much money they make or what they paid for something that's considered gauche, that kind of thing. Also, most men say they get messages from their father about you need to make a lot of it. You need to hide how much you make. Work for cash if you can't. All these kinds of messages that create shame and secrecy around money. And many men say there's never enough. I never feel like there's enough. That kind of thing. And then the second question I ask is, what message did you receive from your mother around money? Now, you and I were talking for the show, and our family situations were exactly the opposite. My father was the breadwinner. My mom stayed home to raise the family, which is pretty typical. You told me, just the opposite.
Mom was the breadwinner.
Yeah. And so you might have gotten different messages, but a lot of men get messages like, I don't think about it. I don't want to deal with it. Your father deals with that. Or I'm the one that takes care of all the expenses, writes the checks, makes the donations to churches and all that kind of stuff. But your father makes the money. Now, of course, that come out of a 1950s milieu where it was very common to have that dynamic where dad worked and mom stayed home and raised the kids. Nevertheless, those messages seem to be pretty consistent throughout different age groups that I've worked with in this workshop. And those messages, of course, like all shadows, get deeply embedded in us. Things we're not supposed to talk about, the things we're supposed to hide, the things we're supposed to have shame about. I get messages as a child very often about those poor people are that way because they did something wrong or they deserve it or they didn't work hard enough. That's the big message we say. They didn't work hard enough. So, of course, I got a profound message about working my tail off. And I did that my whole life, like many men, to make that almighty dollar.
Yeah. It's so interesting that this, for me, when I first moved to the States, I understand the image part when it comes to money. Like when I had my second business, which had moderate success, I ended up with all this cash, right? That was just kind of flowing in. No real idea what to do with it. I had these messages from mum and dad saying, save it, be wise with it. And I was like, mum and dad, whatever. Right. And so I'm thinking it's all about image. It's all about, I'm this successful young person. I need to keep up this persona and this identity. And that was such a huge operating system for me at the time. Little did I realize it made me so disconnected to the work I was actually doing. It made me disconnected to the people I was hanging out with. It made me want to hang out only with people that were making that kind of money. It's probably the most empty I've ever felt in my life. In fact, enough to sell it on a dime and go to the jungle in Amazon to drink ayahuasca and try and find myself just to take off. And which brought me here to the States. And so, this status thing, right? The class about having wealth and ownership and what I possess to be the representation of my worth. I like the example you used. Money for men is what body image is for women. Not to say that body image doesn't come into play for men or money doesn't come into play for women. But it's so interesting that becomes the measuring stick. And, you say that it's the case here in America, maybe not so much in the rest of the world. And I mean, I witnessed it in Australia. I was a part of it in Australia, but nowhere in the world that I've traveled is it like it here in the United States, where it's about having the bucks to be able to drive the car, have the house, wear the clothes. It's so prevalent. So I want to get an understanding of how it impacted your life. Can we get an insight into your experience? I mean, you obviously mentioned that you worked very hard. because of your upbringing. But how much did the image side of things, the status side of things, play into your experience with money?
Well, that's an interesting question, Brandon. I made a choice early on in my education that I wanted to become a teacher. And I became a chemistry teacher. So I came out of school with a master's degree in chemistry and a minor in education. Now, I had several job offers before I took my first teaching job. Some of them were in the teaching area, and I did interview in industry. Now, not surprisingly, the industry jobs would have paid me about 2 to 3 times what my teaching job paid me. But I knew what I wanted to do. I sort of had a mission. I wanted to be a teacher. I taught high school for 35 years. And I was aware of the financial sacrifice that created for me and my family. Public school teacher, my first teaching contract I signed for $6,100 a year as a public school teacher.
Wow.
And of course it went up, but I taught for 35 years, never made more than about $55,000 a year. And so my retirement is impacted, my Social Security was impacted, and I was the sole breadwinner for a young family, 2 young daughters. My wife stayed home to take care of the kids. That was a conscious choice we made. And I felt this enormous financial pressure on me for years and years and years. The end of the month, it would not be unusual to have $50 left in our checking account. I mean, some emergency came along, we'd be destroyed. And there are many, many, many people like that in the world today, too. And I went along like that for a long time. I taught 3 jobs in the summer. I was supposed to have my vacation. I taught 3 summer jobs. I did extra things after school to make extra money. And I felt this enormous pressure. And that wasn't really alleviated until I started doing the money shadow work. And I started realizing what a hold that the money shadow had on me, how profound that those messages were, how scary they were, and how terrified I was as a father and a husband. And
what were the
messages? You're not good enough. You're not making enough. Your family's going to go down. Well, I can feel that right now. I can feel the tears coming. People are going to find out. You're going to lose your house. You know, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And luckily, you know, I got into MKP and I started doing this deep dive, and it really helped me. It really helped me. Wow. Most of us are infected with this belief that making more money makes us happier. Therefore, I need to make more money and more money and more money. And one of the things I learned in my research around money shadow and the reading that I did around it came from this wonderful book called Your Money or Your Life. Isn't that a great title? Your Money or Your Life, by Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robin. Dominguez is since passed, but it's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. And in that book, there's a real deep dissection of how we became such a consumer society in the United States. Why you noticed it when you came to this country, how different it is. For example, in the 30s during the Depression, there was a purposeful governmental decision to stop thinking of the members of the United States as citizens and start thinking of them as consumers, as a way to bolster business, to build consumption, to build advertising became huge in those days, purposely,
right?
To pull us out of the Depression. Now, I'm not saying that's nefarious in and of itself, but I'm saying it changed the way our relationship with money, our relationship with work, and so forth. In this book, they talk about this brilliant idea. There's this thought that as I keep making money, I'm going to get happier and happier and happier and happier, right? Well, truth is, research shows that's not the case. Once we reach a certain level of income where our basic needs are met, and then a little bit more where we can have some relaxation, have some fun, maybe take some vacations, a little bit more, we've reached maximum happiness. And when we start making more money beyond that, we actually see our happiness begin to either level off or decrease. Now, this isn't something that's just made up. It's based on some pretty deep research. It's all in the book. It's good stuff. And they call that peak of the curve where I've reached maximum satisfaction for the money that I make. It's got a simple word. It's called enough. Enough, which most of us, I didn't know what enough meant. most men don't, because we're inculcated with this belief that more is better, you know, on and on and on. And we can never, ever catch up then, and we never, ever can feel good enough. Well, I was able to get to a point of realizing and bringing into my own life what enough meant for me. You know, I was able to relax more. I was able to feel less pressure as a father, as a partner, and relieved a lot of that internal turmoil that was going on around my money shadow. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I see that with lots and lots of men and women. So that concept of enough, it may vary slightly from person to person, but it isn't a huge difference. It isn't a huge difference. So what is enough for you? What's enough for me? When will I have that maximum satisfaction associated with a certain amount of income?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, along with the health industry, finance, you know, wealth is one of the top 3 most marketed to industries in the world, universally. And the basic fundamentals of marketing is speak to an internal emotion and feeling in someone, press that pain button, tell them it's this external problem that's going on, and that your solution is going to solve all of that. Right? You know, you basically, you get rid of all those bad internal feelings and the external problem's gone, and you've got all this money and you're going to be happy. That is the marketing narrative generally in wealth across the board. But the challenge with that is the solution isn't really solving the internal problem, as you've elucidated, is that it sounds like we have to do more internal work and around the messages around money than actually the money problem itself. Because I've been learning that myself recently, that when I was able to finally meet the woman of my dreams, the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, the amount of bandwidth I shared for money just like the conversation internally changed dramatically. That I met this person that we could be in a trailer. I don't care. Now, obviously we have expensive hobbies and we like to travel. So that's not how we're going to, you know, choose to look at, how we approach money. But the loops it closed for me, or at least gave me solace around outside of the money stuff, in my relationship with myself, my relationship with others, love and what that looks like, the shadow, the gold, everything in between. It's amazing how much I was using money as the poster child for my problems, when it really wasn't. It actually wasn't the conversation that needed to be had. It wasn't the work that needed to be had. And when it comes to, this is to every single person out there, man, woman, non-binary, that gets into self-work, it's so hard to quantify. It's so hard to measure something that is really, in essence, intangible, self-work. Right. Like, it's hard to say, I'm a level 3 in self-compassion now. Right. I'm a black belt in shadow work. Like, we don't have those measures anymore. Or we've never had those measures, sorry. And so it's scary to think that, oh, really my challenges with making money has something to do with something that happened in my upbringing or some challenges in my relationship. It can seem daunting and overwhelming, but it really is just the first step of just accepting that things aren't the way that you want them to be. Some things aren't working, and that money may not be the problem.
Exactly. It is a symptom. And you pointed out in your story about your relationship that the rheostat of what's enough can change. And that's beautiful. I mean, that's where the work can be. Looking at the internal messages around worthiness and money for men is daunting, and it's scary as hell. I mean, I've got into some terror. I mean, real terror about existential, stuff that comes up when I had dove into this, and I continue to dive into it. I'm just not done. But I'm learning to value my worth far more for who I am as a person rather than what I make or what my financial situation is. And I just want to throw this in. imagine the difficulty it is for people of color who have far less family wealth than us white people. In the United States, it's about it's about 7%. Black families have about 7% of the wealth on average in the United States compared to white families. In other words, white families have 14 times more wealth. Now, that's a whole another issue we can talk about, and we did a little bit when we did the piece on UPPD. But what that throws in then is a whole nother level of worthiness. And does my society value me? It's laid on top of what you and I experience as white men. And it's profound. And it takes conscious, purposeful work, like all of our shadow work, to dig it out, to look at the messages, and to re-script, those messages. So I'm valued for who I am, for the heart that I have, for the mission that I do in the world, rather than how much money I make. And I still have to pay my bills, of course. So that's the conundrum there, right? I still have to make enough to pay my bills.
And I want to speak to that for sure while we have this time together. But I want to know, when you did your work around self-worth and it not having to do with what you made financially, how did your financial life change?
Well, strangely enough, my financial life got more relaxed. And when that happened, I was able to be okay with enough. I live very simply. My retirement isn't all that high, but I live very simply. I've been smart with my finances, my savings and so forth. Luckily, I listened to my dad, who said, save, save, save. He was a child of the Depression, so that was huge for him. And I said I had a savings account set up when I was 3 years old. And my allowances often went into my 25 cents a week went into my checking account or savings account rather than into my pocket sometimes. Sure. But I'm grateful for that. I learned to make do. I came from a family where the same blue jeans I wore got passed on to my brothers and then my sisters, and my blue jeans were often not new. They were, bought at Goodwill and so forth. So, I'm okay with that. I don't need a fancy existence. And the want of that's created through, as you pointed out before, advertising, what we see in movies, what we see on TV. It's like, oh my God, he's got that. Why can't I have that? So that battling that message is profound. And I think it's deep work. I think it's primal work for men.
Yeah, primal work. That's something Dene Sebastiana says a lot. Another prolific man in the Mankind Project is that a lot of our work around relationships, money, and sex is actually just primal issues in another form that has just come into the surface that we use to mark under the guise of money.
Exactly.
My experiences, and when I share my experiences, I'm aware that it's very naive for me at 28 to suggest that I've arrived at an understanding around money, sex, relationships. No, like I am a yellow belt. I consider myself maybe not a white belt in some things, but a yellow belt at least. And my current understanding of my relationship with money, which is very new, is that the more I've learned to value myself, not whatever image I've portrayed. I've done a lot of that, and I still can do that. But just raw, naked, in the mirror, just me. It's amazing how that has translated to financial wealth, and how I have valued myself more with my clients, with my business connections, with my network, with my friends and family. The things I say yes and no to have definitely created a lot more financial abundance. No way near what I deem myself to be capable of or where my goals are. But that kind of old cliche of, value yourself and others will value you and the money will come. Like, I know how painfully cliche it is, but it's also painfully ironic that does happen that way for me, just in my experience, I can say. But I prefer the way you look at it of it's enough. right? You've positioned it to be something that's enough.
Yeah, right now in this moment,
you.
enough is okay. Tomorrow, I may be going, what about this?
Sure.
We want to travel. Yeah, so it's an ongoing process. It really is of evaluating loving myself enough to say, this is enough. I'm okay. My basic needs are met.
Yeah.
I've got a little extra. I got a partner who loves me. I got kids who love me. I have a fantastic eye group that is very, very supportive. What more do I need? Do I really need a Jaguar? No, probably not. Would it be fun? Yeah. Maybe.
And and at the same time, there could be someone out there cruising in a Jaguar, top down, Ray-Bans on.
Yeah.
Who would give it all away to have what you have.
Right, exactly. And I do some coaching, and I've had a number of clients that were very, very wealthy who said, I'd give it all up in a minute if I could have a relationship with my son or daughter. Didn't bring them any happiness. In fact, they realized that the chasing after the almighty dollar is what separated them from their family, their kids, their wife, and so forth. And they have deep regret, and I don't want to have that regret.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to come back to our conversation around, more marginalized communities and African Americans, Hispanics. Like, they really are impacted differently with greater challenges financially. And I was speaking to some friends of mine recently, friends of color, and I asked them about having this conversation around money, and I was asking them, like, what was the desire for you growing up when it came to money? And they said it was the cars with the sound systems, it was the chains, it was the shoes, it was this outward expression of financial success by having these things that I can judge. I can judge as unnecessary, or why would you need the car with the wheels and stuff like that? And they said it really, more than anything, was to get away from a really cut off experience from money growing up. This having to survive, the lacking of when there was an opportunity to acquire money through whatever means, there was no second guessing. It was just jump at it because of just how restricted money was for them. And how difficult it was to gain any access to finances. And it really opened up my mind to the experience for others. What has been your experience working with people of difference that have had different, grown up in different communities and have had these restrictions?
Well, very much what you said. I mean, it isn't accidental that communities of color have far less wealth. That was brought about by purposeful governmental policies. After World War II, veterans were given access to home loans at an unprecedented rate, guaranteed by the federal government, which meant there were lower rates. Money was available, plentiful, as long as you were Caucasian, as long as you were white. Black people, brown people, indigenous people were not given access to those, even if they were veterans. This is a horrible time in our history. Redlining, literally, they drew red lines on maps around certain neighborhoods that said, we will not lend money to anybody in this area. There was even policies where if you lived, had Black people in your neighborhood, they wouldn't lend money to you.
Yeah, it impacted your insurance rates. It impacted all sorts of things. That's why so many communities wouldn't allow people of color to move in. I mean, we're next to a neighborhood that still has that in their clause. Yeah. It hasn't been updated.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it isn't legal anymore, but it's still there. And of course, this week was the 100th anniversary of the race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It wasn't just a massacre. It didn't happen just because of race. It happened because there was Black people who were successful. They were accumulating wealth. They were building businesses. And it was an extremely prosperous community. And there was jealousy. And so the slightest provocation gave them the right to destroy 35 square blocks of the city, burn it to the ground, churches, hospitals, businesses, homes. And of course, killing what some people say is over 200 men, women, and children. It's just unthinkable that could happen, and it's happened many times in this country. Again, purposeful. No one was ever arrested for any of those crimes. I mean, planes were used to drop firebombs on buildings during that attack. It's just horrific.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of hearing the stories of these 300 over 100-year-old survivors of that, talking about what that day was like in the aftermath. It's soul crushing that went on and was never acknowledged. It was erased from the history books for almost 100 years. And now people are starting to talk about it more and more. And there are many, many other events like that. So those types of things, government policies, Jim Crow laws, and those things like that conspire to keep families of color in their place financially. Them poorer, less familial wealth to pass on to the next generation, less opportunity to get into colleges and education and so forth. It still has an impact today.
Isn't it so naive of us to think that, well, everyone has a chance to stand at the plate and swing just like everyone else. Whereas I don't know the full extent, but I'm pretty sure there's 10 plus generations of people in this country that have passed down generation, which is eventually going to come to me.
Right.
And not a lot of families of color have that, or have had the ability to even accumulate wealth to very recent times.
Very recent times, exactly.
And so it is soul crushing. So, which brings me to the question of how can we elevate consciousness? Now, consciousness, it can be very airy-fairy depending on the context and the conversation that's being had. But how can we elevate the conversation not only internally around money, but within our friends and our families and our communities, so that we can start to not just change our own perspectives around wealth, but those around us, create more of a ripple effect? How do we start?
That's a great question. And the answer, I think, at least for me, is educate yourself. Start doing some reading. There's some fabulous specials. PBS just put on a 2-day special about Tulsa, for example. And they had a concomitant special about resurrecting the Black middle class. Look at those, read, look at the statistics. Don't reflexively respond as so many white people do to say things like, it's not my job to end racism, or I'm not, overtly racist, therefore I don't have anything to do. Nonsense. We all participate in a very clear systemic oppression. Some call it white supremacy, where it benefits people to look like you and I, Brandon, and hurts people that don't look like you and I. So educate yourself about that. Do some reading. Get uncomfortable. Take it to your groups. If you're in a men's group, take it there and have a conversation about it. And then start creating conversations, and if you're willing, with people of difference, people of color, humbly reach out and say, I would love to have a conversation. Can we talk? Can we have a coffee? And begin a relationship. And I'm not just talking about superficially. I mean, get to know people, have dinner with them, have them to your house. You go to their house, go to each other's churches. That has enriched my life tremendously. And it's given me unbelievable awareness about the differences that happened that were right before my very eyes, and I completely ignored it. So those are the kinds of things. If you're in an all-white men's circle, for example, find a way to connect with communities of color. There's 100 ways to do it. Get involved with a 12-step group that's more men of color. Get involved with work in prisons. I've done that too. Join SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is the white ally arm of Black Lives Matter. Start showing up for meetings and protests and things of that nature. Get to know people at a different level. And I've had to learn to step back and let people of color lead. Let them take the center stage. Let them be centered. And that's not hard. That's not easy to do for a guy like me that's been a quote unquote natural leader my whole life. And it's absolutely incumbent. I have to do that. So I do it to the best of my ability. I slip up all the time, Brandon. But I mean, those are some of the things. Read about these things and talk to people about it. I can't help but be moved. My heart is torn open again and again when I hear friends of mine, acquaintances of mine that are people of color talk about their life and how different it is from mine, when they feel safe enough to really talk and share. And of course, that fits in deeply with the money shadow and this whole thing of class that we've been talking about in this show. So thanks for asking that question. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the answer, Rick. You know, I'm learning more and more of the ways that I can become a better ally to those that are different than I am. And the way I've learned to ask those questions through help from people like yourself and the incredible facilitators and leaders you have at UPPD. And, you know, my greatest guides have been my friends of difference, the non-white folk in my life, the non-straight folk in my life. And I've learned to ask questions differently with them, to not say, hey, you know, help me understand, tell me what, you know, like, you know, what I need to know and all the rest, and change it to, what do you want me to know? And start from a place of connection. We might both like weightlifting. Let's start there and have a conversation there. We both might like gardening and cooking. Let's start there and build that relationship. It doesn't always have to be under a heavy blanket of a heavy topic. Maybe just have a human conversation first and
have fun with each other.
The money
Get your
part.
families together, you know, and it's very, very enriching, as you say. And I learn all the time because I keep my ears open and for the most part, my mouth shut. try to really soak up what it's like. And I do this with other communities of difference too, with the LGBTQ community, with women. It's been, again, enriching. And there's lots and lots of opportunities to do that.
Absolutely. Well, mate, I want to ask you, is there like a book or a resource around money that you feel is almost like your red pill? Like what is the first place you would start as far as our listeners, where they can go to begin their journey of investigating their relationship with money?
Well, there's a lot of books out there. I mean, so I'm not going to name a whole bunch of them, but the one I started with, The Money or Your Life, was epiphany for me. It was eye-opening.
So Money or Your Life.
Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robbins. It's a fabulous book. I think it's 1990s copyright, and I'm not sure it's been reprinted, but you can find it on Amazon. I highly recommend that. And again, there's just tons of stuff out there. Again, educate yourself. Read. I'm trying to think of the it's not coming to me, the Asian man that had a whole series of books about money. Anyhow, that's it. Thank you.
Rich Dad Poor Dad. And how can we find out more about you, mate, and the work that you're up to?
Thank you. Well, you can go to my Facebook page. Just hook up Rick Broniec with Facebook. You can go to my website, www.powertoolsformen.org, where we share a ton. Myself and my writing partner, Leonard Shimshak, share a lot of great stuff for men, and included in that is stuff on class and money, and race and other differences. And hang around MKP. We'll staff together, and you and I had the privilege of meeting that way. And hopefully we'll get face-to-face trainings going soon, and we'll be able to connect on a staffing basis or in a circle basis. Yeah.
Absolutely. And awesome, Rick, mate. We'll make sure that links to all of those are going to be in the show notes for the listeners. For those that joined us live, I apologize. We somehow lost the connection along the way. And I think that was just when you dropped those fantastic bombs at the end there. So I'm going to make sure to follow up with all of those that were on the live, that they get access to this episode once we go live as well on the podcast format. And if I could leave the listeners with anything just from my learnings from our conversation, Rick, and some recent work that I've been doing with through NYU and Niobe Way, who we had on the show previously, talking about the connection crisis. I did a program with them called The Listening Project, and it was about solving this crisis of connection that we are facing in the world through connection, through listening, through what they call transformative interviewing. And so how all of that pertains to what I'm about to say is, the next time you connect with someone where the usual conversation might be around work and cars and what Niobe would call a thin question, change it to a thick question, which is a more open-ended, hey, like, what keeps you up at night? You know, what are your fears? What's your vision for your family and the world? And change the conversation to be something a little bit more deep. And one thing I've learned with my friends that we've had a more superficial kind of relationship, that when we stopped talking about money and we stopped talking about work, we were able to create lasting friendships that are just continuing to go deeper and deeper, and the trust there is growing more and more.
I love it. Thick questions. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rick, mate, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. As always, can't wait till the next time that we get you to join us, and really appreciate you diving into Money Shadow with us. I know this is a conversation that we could have probably a 10-part series on, and that would only be part one of the real conversation here. So, mate, is there anything that you'd love to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Thank you. I would say this, the money shadow has its tentacles in almost every other shadow in my life. It all interconnects. And it's been a very rich experience for me to dive into it. I invite you all into the deep end of the pool. It's not comfortable, but you're going to get a lot out of it. So have fun with it.
Beautiful words. Have fun with it. Well, guys, this has been another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. We hope you're all staying safe. We hope you're staying healthy. And we have some little inklings and teasers that in-person New Warrior trainings are coming our way. So I know many of you that have been listening to the show found out about the Mankind Project through the podcast, and you may not have known about these New Warrior trainings. They get mentioned all the time, but we haven't had any in person since the pandemic. So hey, very exciting stuff. We will keep you all updated as to any announcements and advancements about those materializing into actually getting in person and doing some great work. Rick, been a pleasure. And all of you out there, lots of love. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Brendan.
We got a bonus for you. Rick called in and wanted to share a poem with him that really landed on his heart and what he believed would be very pertinent to the conversation we'd had today. So here is A Small Green Island by Rumi. Gotta love Rumi. Enjoy.
Brandon, I'd like to share a poem with the audience, Rumi poem. I love Rumi. And it speaks to this idea of not being enough, right? There's a small green island where one cow lives alone, a meadow of an island. The cow grazes till nightfall, full and fat, but during the night she panics and grows thin as a single hair. What will I eat tomorrow? There's nothing left. By dawn, the grass has grown up again waist high. The cow starts eating, and by dark the meadow is clipped short. She's full of strength and energy, but she panics in the darkness again as before and grows abnormally thin overnight. The cow does this over and over for many years, and this is all she knows. She never thinks. The meadow has never failed to grow back. Why should I be afraid every night that it won't? The cow is the bodily soul. The island field is the world that grows lean with fear and fat with blessing. Lean and fat. White cow, don't make yourself miserable of what's to come or not to come. Rumi.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.